Hey guys, Kevin here with Victory 4x4. Today in the garage, I'm going to show you how to install our new Blitz bumper for the 14 and up GX460. So to get started with this install, we're going to need to remove this entire front fascia from the vehicle. The reason we need to do that is to get the factory crash bar out of here, as well as these proximity sensors to transfer them into your new bumper. So to begin, we're going to pop the hood and get started. First step in getting this out of the way is going to be to remove this interior plastic piece here from under the hood. And in order to do that, it's just held in with a bunch of plastic push pins that are as simple as pushing the centers down and then lifting them up either with a pry tool, or in a lot of cases you can just kind of wiggle this panel and get them to pop up out of their hole. Now you're going to want to save these as you pop them up out of here, because this will go back in later on. With all those clips out of the way, simply remove this plastic panel and set it to the side for now. Now with that panel out of the way, you're just going to have 4 10mm screw heads up here that you're going to have to remove. Now with the top of that grille freed up, you can come down here to each of your inner fender areas. Again, using your 10mm, you'll have 4 screws that need to be removed to free this up from the inner fender. These clips may require just a little bit of help from a flat blade screwdriver to kind of get behind here and pry them, and that'll free it up from this fascia. Now here underneath the front of the vehicle, it looks like we've got about 8 more screws to remove, again using our 10mm. In our case, this vehicle is already equipped with our lower skid plates, so if yours is factory and still has a factory splash guard or skid in place here, yours may be just a little bit different. Just know that that skid will need to be removed before this install. Now again, with some of the clips down here, you'll just need the help of your flat screwdriver to help get these removed and freed up from the fascia. Now with all those screws removed, you can start pulling this fascia free here around the fender as well as up around the headlight. And there it's just going to be held in with some push-in clips. So you just need to get your hand in here behind this inner fender, get a good grip on it, and then start pulling kind of out with a little bit of force. You don't want to go too crazy and damage any of that, but once one comes, they all start to come free pretty easily. Now, leaving it about like that, it'll allow you enough room to access in here and get to the electrical connectors as well as hoses you need to remove before getting this all the way off. All right, now we took the liberty of pulling our inner fender a little farther out of the way to kind of be able to show you guys what you got to get to here. But one thing you're going to need to remove on each side is this fog light connector here. And then on the driver's side, you'll have this front bumper harness connector here that needs to be removed before this thing can be separated from the vehicle. So now that you have all the electrical disconnected on both the driver and passenger side, you can come over here to the passenger side, and on this headlight sprayer system, you can see we just lightly clamped a pair of vice grips here to stop the flow of this fluid so that we can disconnect those sprayers from the vehicle and allow us to remove this front fascia. Now that you have all those connectors, clips, screws, and everything out of the way, you're just going to come up here, kind of front and center on this setup. You can get a good grip on the grille somewhere down here, good grip up top, and you can kind of wiggle all this free. There's just a few more retainers that run along the center of there that were the last thing holding that up. Now there is an alternative method. If you didn't want to use vice grips or something to pinch off that rubber line for fear of damaging it, you can remove this whole sprayer system from the front fascia. And in order to do that, you got to start by removing these sprayers. So you'll pull out the front like this. There's just a small plastic tab on top that you can get removed with your fingernail or a small screwdriver. And then on the back side of it here, you'll need to remove this metal clip, slide the white plastic portion down, and that'll allow you to pinch the tab in here on the front side and release that hole sprayer from the bumper. Now once you've done that on both sides, then you'll need to come across the front edge of the bumper here and remove all the clips holding that hose in place, and that would allow you to leave this entire system connected, not have to worry about spilling any of that fluid along the way. Now with the front fascia removed, the next step is to get this factory crash bar out of the way. In order to do that, you're going to have 4 bolts per side. There's 3 out here on the outside of the frame, 1 on the inside, and those are going to be using a 14mm wrench. And that can go right in the trash. Now this lower portion of the bumper here is actually a separate piece, and it sits below our cut line, so we can actually just get that out of the way. In order to do that, it's all just held in with these little plastic clips. You simply push the tab down and slide those horizontally out of the holes they're in. Now the next thing you need to do is get these 2 center proximity sensors removed from the bumper so that you can transfer those into the new one. In order to do that, you've kind of got just a push tab here on one side of this that you can pinch with your finger, and then on the other side there's a small plastic tab that actually needs to be pressed in while you lift the entire sensor assembly off of this cage housing. Now with that off to the side, this cage housing needs to be removed as well. It simply has a black plastic tab on each side of it that can be depressed, and then that entire cage can be pushed out through the front of the grille. Now we'll simply reuse these cages to install these sensors into the new bumper. Alright, now when we're reinstalling these sensors into the new bumper, what you're going to need to do is make sure that those cages are rotated so that the sensors are going to come straight up from the bottom like this. In order to do that, you're going to need to create just a little bit of slack here in this harness. So I'm going to show you how to do that. What you'll need to do is come over to this clip just to the outside of your connector and get that freed up from the back side of the bumper. And then the harness is simply held to that clip with just a little bit of electrical tape. So we'll lightly cut that tape with our razor blade, being sure not to cut into the harness at all. And then you're just going to flip that to the bottom side of that clip. The clip can go back into the grill, and then you can come over here to the center clip and do the same exact thing. So we'll just remove this from the bumper. Again, cut this tape just to free it up from the clip. And then slide that right down underneath and clip that back in. After that, you'll just need to remove these 2 clips from the bumper, or you can cut these zip ties, whichever works for you, because those aren't going to be reused. And now you can see that gives you plenty of slack for this to hang down and attach to your new bumper. Alright, so the next thing we're going to need to do here is remove just this lower, in our case gray, portion of the grill. So to do that, we got to lay it back on its face. And what we're actually going to do here is remove the entire grill assembly, get that disconnected from the bottom, and then place the top portion back in the bumper. So to get this grill removed, we're going to start by removing all the Phillips head screws that are holding it in place. It looks like we've got 8 around the outside perimeter here, and then about 4 more here in the center. All right, next across the center here, you're gonna have a few more of these white little push down, slide over tabs, just like we removed from the lower section of the bumper. And then you're gonna have tabs going all the way around the outside of this that you need to remove as well. And those are very similar. Again, just a little push tab that allows it to release from the fascia portion. All right, so go ahead and release all those tabs across the top of this grille portion, and then come on each side down here toward the bottom. You're gonna just need to get in here with a flat blade screwdriver, use a little bit of outward pressure, and that'll release this from the upper chrome portion of this grille. Be sure to do this on both sides. Now you can discard this lower portion and get to installing the upper. All right, now you can see at this point, we obviously have that lower portion removed like we wanted. Now you can take the upper portion of the grille, reinstall it back into the fascia, make sure all your clips get lined up nice and neat, and then go ahead and reinstall the screws that hold it in place. You'll just have 2 left over now since you don't have the bottom section in. Then you're also gonna have 1 extra screw left over from where that bolted into the center section right here. Now with all that done, we can get this reinstalled on the vehicle and get it marked for our cut. All right, so now that this is hanging up here and all the clips are just holding it back in place, you can reinstall the top 4 fasteners and then go to both sides and you can reconnect your wiring harness as well as your headlight sprayer hoses to keep all that stuff up out of the way while we're making our cuts. All right, now with the fascia back up here, we're ready to start laying out our cut. So in order to show you guys where you need to cut and how we need to do all this, we went ahead and threw our laser level up here. Don't worry, you don't have to have one to do this because our cuts are gonna follow body lines on this front fascia. It just kind of helps as a visual aid here in this case. So what you're gonna need to do, following the bottom edge of the radius on this body line, kind of where the radius meets this front face, you'll need to follow that all the way around from the wheel well out to here. And then in order to carry this all the way across to where it meets up with another body line right over here on the front edge of the bumper, you're simply gonna stretch a piece of tape along that area to give you a straight line. So I'll go ahead and show you kind of what that looks like here. This line is probably a little hard to see out here, but when you're doing this, when you're cutting this, you'll be able to feel it, see it, won't be a big deal. So I'm gonna set one edge of my tape out here, kind of just above that laser line as you can see, and then carry that right across, lining it up with the body line over here. And the reason I'm taping up on the top side of that is just to kind of help protect the paint up here, because everything above this cut line is what we're going to keep, what we're going to see with our bumper installed. Now with this piece in place, we'll go ahead and clean this up back here, making sure this is a nice straight line, and then carry another piece of tape all the way back, like I said, to the wheel well opening. Okay, so now that you have this lower line all taped out, you're ready to cut the bottom side of it, you're gonna need to come in here and make basically a vertical cut line coming down. So that line is gonna run essentially parallel to this small face in here. And again, for that one, we're simply gonna line up a tape edge, run it down to intersect with our first cut line right down here. So essentially you'll have a cut there, and then going out there. Once you have that done and in place, you'll go do the same thing on the other side, and then you'll want to measure from this point where your 2 lines connect essentially. You'll measure from this point to that same location on the other side, making sure it's no greater than 45.5 inches wide.
If it is, you'll want to bring these angles in just a little bit because you probably came out a little too wide. Just kind of food for thought here, something to keep in the back of your mind. You can always cut more, but you can't add that material back on. So feel free to be a little bit on the narrow side, test fit it, take a little more if you need to. Now for our cuts here, I'm gonna at least start out with this 4.5-inch cutoff wheel. There's a lot of other things you can use in this case. We have an air saw around. You could probably use a smaller air cutoff if that's what you have. Just anything that's gonna make a nice clean cut on this plastic is kind of what you're looking for. You probably don't wanna get crazy with something like a Sawzall or something that's gonna tear it all up, you know? So to get started here, I'm just gonna kind of carry this line all the way around to the front where it intersects with my vertical cut. Again, making sure I'm cutting on the bottom side of my tape or essentially right here with this body line. Now with that horizontal cut made all the way up to this point, again working on the outside of this tape line, I'm just gonna go ahead and cut all the way up into here, basically freeing up this entire center section. Now at this point, I'm just gonna go over and do the same thing on the other side, only over here. I'm probably gonna start with this vertical cut just to get this out of the way. Okay, so now you got all this lower plastic cut out of the way, but you still kind of have not so much a jagged edge, but a little bit of plastic residue where some of that melted, things like that, hanging down on the bottom. So at this point, there's a few things you can do. If you have a metal deburring tool, sometimes those will come in here and clean up that plastic edge pretty nice. Another thing, which is what I'm gonna give a try here, is just a 90-degree air grinder. In this case, I got a little flap wheel sanding disc on it. And all I'm gonna do, kind of paying attention to the rotation of this disc, making sure it's rotating into the plastic here to kind of smooth all this under nice and neat. I'm just gonna come back under here and clean this all up. Now that we're happy with all our cuts, we'll go ahead and get our bumper ready to install. Okay, so at this point, you got the truck all set, ready to go, but before you're ready to install this bumper, you might have a few things to do here on the ground. If you're gonna be installing a winch, now's the time to do so. If not, go ahead and install a winch block-off plate. And then if you're gonna be installing on a 2020 and up, this is a good time to install this grill filler using your 1/4-inch button head hardware that we supply. Just note, if you're gonna put this on right now, go ahead and just leave the nuts loose because you're gonna have to attach the sensor harness using the P-clamps to the bottom side of that same hardware once the bumper's installed. Now lastly, here on the ground, you're gonna need to get these sensor cages installed, but there is a slight modification you're gonna have to make to these due to the thickness of our material before they can be put in. Okay, so here you can see the sensor cage, and you can see that it's got 4 metal tabs that run all the way around the outside. And those press in when this slides into the hole that's in our bumper. And the problem with the thickness of our bumper is that those actually push in so far that you can't always get the sensor pushed into this from the back side. So what you need to do is simply pull these tabs out lightly, like so, and then taking a pair of pliers, you can squeeze the ends of those down just so that they don't have quite as much spring pressure, and that way they don't push in nearly as far as well. You can get the sensor to snap into that from the backside. Now once you have that done, you can insert these into the bumper, just paying attention to the location of this tab and how it's going to be oriented with the sensor. Again, making sure, like we told you earlier, that those are going to come up from the bottom. Now at this point, with the help of a friend, or in my case, our handy transmission jack, you can go ahead and start getting your bumper installed. So we're gonna get this up in here. One thing you wanna make sure of is that this harness winds up over top of the bumper mounts here and not pinched behind those or anything. And then as you get this back here, while this is all still just a little bit loose, it'll be a good time since this will be able to hang down just a little bit to get these clamps bolted in as well as your sensors clipped into place. Okay, and one tip here as you go to get this installed, we supply new hardware with this bumper to mount it to the frame. So go ahead and take one of your old bolts that you're not worried about damaging anymore and run that through the nut on the frame plate from the back side. And you can just kind of use that as an alignment pin as you slide this thing up there so you don't have to fight it, wiggle it around too much to get it where it needs to be. Now, like I said, with it up here pretty close to where it's going to be, you can go ahead and snap in these sensors and then bolt your wiring P-clamps in through these top holes. Now with all that done, using the supplied hardware and a little bit of anti-seize along with a 14mm socket or wrench, you can go ahead and get this thing up in place and start threading in bolts and tightening things up. All right, now the two innermost bolts are going to be easiest to access through these holes here in the bumper, and the outermost bolts will be a lot easier to get to if you go through the inner fender. Now at this point, using the supplied P-clamps as well as 1/4" hardware, you can go ahead and secure the harness across the top of the bumper and then tighten those up using a 5/32 Allen. So now that you have all the bolts started and the bumper hanging in place, you want to make sure everything's center, and then you can go ahead and tighten those up. Now to install our tie-in brackets, they're simply going to slide into place just like this between the bumper and the frame, and then using 2 of the provided 1/2" bolts with washers, you'll slide those through the bracket just like that and into the bumper, and then reaching through this top cutout, you can install the serrated flange nuts. And then after you have it hanging loosely on those 2 bolts, simply grab the supplied 12mm bolt and install it into this factory hole. And then with everything loosely installed, you can line this up and tighten it up. Now with all that tight, we need to come over here and do something about these inner fenders that are going to be hanging loose. So to start over here, what you need to do is remove these metal brackets from the inside of them. There's going to be one of these on each side. They're held in place with a plastic rivet, so you can go in pretty easily and drill those out, or take a small set of wire cutters and just cut those off from the back side here. Once you have this out of the way, we'll jump over to the other side and show you how to lay out your cut. Okay, so here working on the driver's side, basically what you're going to need to do is make sure that the outside of this fascia isn't protruding at all past the bumper, that this inner fender is all snapped in place where it's going to be once all the screws are in and tight, and then you'll simply make a mark. You can use tape, a marker, using something as a straight edge, and simply mark just above the bottom edge of the bumper here, and then carry that line all the way across out here, just being sure that you retain these last 3 holes here on the inner fender. All right, so to show you that, I'm just going to kind of be using a piece of masking tape right here. Like I say, I'm going to start out at this corner, come all the way across down here, being sure I retain these holes. And just one thing to note here, you can always cut more, so feel free to leave a little bit of extra here. And also, this is pretty flexible, so you can also push this up if you think it's going to be hanging down too low after you have it cut. All right, now this is pretty thin plastic here, so I'm just going to be using a razor knife to make this cut, but you could probably get away with a pair of tin snips or something like that. All right, now after I have that cut, I kind of got this little pointy end tagging along down here. That's not really going to do anything for us, and it's just going to kind of fight us the way it's bent right there. So I'm going to remove that as well. With all that cut, I'll snap this back into place. All right, so once you have that cut, you're happy with it, you don't have anything hanging down below the bottom surface of the bumper, you're going to need to drill 2 holes back here because we're going to supply you with 2 self-drilling screws for each side. So simply using the 2 larger holes that are left over in this inner fender and a marker, you can mark those and simply push this up out of the way and get a center punch, pilot drill that, and then we'll run them in. Now once we have those pilot holes drilled, we'll simply slide this back down in place, and then using those self-tapping screws we provide along with a washer and a 3/8 socket, we can drive those in. Now I'm going to make sure I leave this one just a little bit loose until I get the second screw started. Make sure that's pulled up in place where I want it, and then tighten both of these up. Now once you have both of these screws tightened up, don't forget to come back here and reuse your factory hardware to reattach that inner fender to the fascia. All right, so with your bumper, we're also going to provide you with 4 of these black plastic caps, and these are just going to go in place in the holes down here. Those are there for you to access your winch mounting, but with all these in, those will just snap into the holes, and it'll just provide you kind of a nice seamless look across the bottom. All right, so now you're going to come back up top, reinstall this under hood trim. Just be sure when you're doing this to make sure that this seal on the top of the grille winds up back inside of the seal right there on the top of the headlight. And then with this trim in place, reusing the clips that you took out earlier. Now remember, earlier I told you that you had to press these in and then you could pull them out of the hole. So now in order to reuse them, you got to come down here on the bottom side and push the bottom of that back out so it looks just like that. Now you can reinstall that in the hole, and then this time you'll simply push it down flush rather than past like that. All right, so that's a wrap for this install. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to us, info@victory4x4.com, or give us a phone call, 269-459-8447.